welcome to the EXCELcast. I'm Jonathan Kuskiski, the Assistant Director for the EXCEL program here at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And today, I'm very pleased to be speaking with the Kenari Saxophone Quartet, one of the laureates of our inaugural M Prize. And it's great to have you back on campus. You're here to do a performance and some talks, and we're so glad to have a chance to talk to you about collaboration sort of versus competition and your mindset as an ensemble that you've used to help elevate your career. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having us.
Great.
Exciting.
Fantastic. So Bob, Corey, Kyle, and Steven, let's just jump right into this conversation. So first of all, you've had, beyond M Prize, many successes at competitions. Coleman, Plowman, Bischoff, probably missing some more, right? And I think it would be relatively easy for one to then assume, because obviously in that kind of process of preparing for a competition, it's competitive, right? That could translate into sort of the way that you approach your growth of your ensemble. But as it turns out, you have a different kind of mindset, right? One that's focused on collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you and how you've grown through these competitions in a positive way, both for yourself and for the field?
Yeah, so I think a large part of that mentality is, especially in the realm of saxophones in general, but of course for any ensemble, trying to raise awareness for whatever music that you're playing. That should be, at least in my opinion, the prime goal, or to where you should strive to get to. If we speak strictly saxophone, the saxophone community, at least right now, in my opinion, is one of really high collaboration. And the reason is because we all have the same goal. And the same goal is to just bring the saxophone to more audiences, to more people. We get the response of, I've never known a saxophone could sound like that, or I didn't know that you guys did stuff like that. I didn't know saxophone could play Bach, or I also didn't know that saxophone could play anything other than, whatever style they're thinking of. And so with that sort of comment that we get all the time, the trying to push other groups away and climb on top and try to feel, or look at it as, we're competing with other groups, logically doesn't make much sense. So the way that we approach it, and the way that we have been approaching it, is sure, we've done really well in competitions, but so have a bunch of other groups too. Competitions only last as long as the competition does, but what happens after the competition is what is really important. And so rather than continuing that competition after the competition is finished, we work to instead bring in everyone that we can. We try so hard to not only raise awareness for our group, but raise awareness for other groups as well. Like, hire these guys. These guys are really, really great. Or hire that person. I think that would be really wonderful. Rather than just always say, hire us, hire us. Yeah. It's more important to us that our community as a whole, and not just saxophones, but classical music in general, or contemporary music, or jazz, or whatever it is that you want to do, rather than pushing everyone away, and bring everyone in. That's kind of our mentality.
That's great. So you're basically talking about this sort of outward mission, right? That of course you want to succeed as a group, but you also see yourself as ambassadors for chamber music and for saxophone quartet music, and I love the fact that you're talking actually about actively referring other people that you respect, who you may have encountered through some of these competitions or other activities, to help give them opportunities as well. It's a wonderful philosophy. So obviously competition can be helpful if it's successful in the sense that you win a prize. I'm sure that's good. Maybe it opens opportunities, so cash is probably a nice thing too. But what are the other things that you have benefited from through the process of going to some of these competitions? I'm thinking about in terms of how you play, your philosophy, how you communicate, and other things.
Yeah, I think it's really given us a sense of focus, especially when we started as a student ensemble, having some concrete goals, having some things to prepare for, and having to get out there and prepare a 60-minute program, a 75-minute program in multiple rounds was just really good for our development, and inspired us to be a more diverse ensemble as far as playing Bach, like Kyle was talking about, but also playing the music of more contemporary composers. Tonight we'll be playing some David Laganello, which was written just a few years ago. And I think that is one thing that is really special about competitions for for young groups is to have some really concrete goals to work towards. So
That's great.
Yeah, I think on a more philosophical level, preparing for competitions has also given us some introspective to think like, what makes us unique, what sets us apart, and really what is our voice and how can we contribute in a meaningful way. And I think all the time we spend really thinking about that really helps us to grow as a group and together as four people, and that's been incredibly helpful.
So one thing it also seems related to that I'm curious about is that it seems that within the competition circuit there's also a community, right? I mean, you probably run into some of the same groups, right?
Yeah.
And so how does that, and that's where I think this, going back to the original point, it's a bit of a tricky issue for let's say an outsider who hasn't gone through this process, that it's like how could they be friends with the teams they're competing against? But inevitably it sounds like that's exactly what you do, right? You're connecting with other groups, you're learning from them, you're inspired by them. Can you talk a little bit about that? I don't want to presume that that's the case, but would you say that you kind of you've grown in terms of your community and your networking, or however you want to think about it, through that work?
Absolutely. And I think this kind of goes off of what Kyle's point that he was making earlier about the saxophone community and wanting to bring the saxophone to larger audiences.
Yeah.
We're kind of the outsiders in terms of having our instrument being created only 150 years ago or odd years. And when we encounter other groups who are trying to do the same things that we are, we just obviously want to support each other. So
Right.
and there's another thing that I was thinking about in terms of when you're playing chamber music and you're really keyed into the concept of working with other musicians to create something bigger. It goes beyond just that ensemble and that rehearsal or that performance for that one group. When you have multiple groups who are trying to do the same things, it should be an outgrowth of how we interact with each other within our own ensembles, how we interact and collaborate with other ensembles in their entirety. And that becomes relatively simple to do when you keep running into the same people at the same competitions. And we often make points to go out and get dinner with other ensembles who are competing and just try to always remember that we're all here to make music, regardless of who wins or who doesn't advance to the next round. It's all about the music. And so that spirit of collaboration is really what drives how we try to interact.
And a direct result of that, I mean, just recently, in the past few months, a pool of 7 different saxophone quartets, including us, commissioned a single composer. And so it wasn't just one quartet, trying to commission this composer. Instead, it was this collaboration between 7 different quartets, all who know each other, all who have done the competition circuits, all who have competed against each other. And when we got invited to be a part of that, it was so cool because we now know that the other saxophone quartets feel the same way that we do. We're not competing. We're trying to be trying to be a family in terms of working together. And so that was a direct result of this mentality of collaboration rather than competition. Is now the saxophone quartet has a new piece that's going to be performed, and it's really great music.
Right.
And so I think that's just proof that this mentality, at least in our community, is really working.
That's great. I really appreciate the concrete example of how you can use, it's sort of a concept similar to co-opetition, right, where you find what might look like competitors in your market, talking from an entrepreneurial standpoint for a moment, and you find ways to actually all of you benefit from this, right? Because you maybe wouldn't have been able to commission that individual composer on your own. So you're able to do that, you're able to get that work out to the world, and it's going to have a lot more impact, longer legs, if you will, because there are going to be more groups performing it, taking it to new communities, and so forth. That's fantastic. So one of the other things about your group, if you go to their website, which we'll share at the end of our episode, you talk about diverse musical styles, just really seems to be integrated into your mission. And Corey, you are a composer as well, correct? So can you talk a little bit about, I'm curious about how you think about the aesthetic goals of the group. We've hinted a little bit at that already. So I'm curious about that, and also how that connects to the origins of Kenari. So maybe that's a place to start, actually. How did you, I mean, did you come together over one piece and you're like, oh, we all love this piece? Or did you come together as a group because you had the opportunity to play with each other and then you said, guys, this sounds great, let's keep doing it? Tell me more.
Yeah, well, we started as a student group at Indiana. Corey and I knew each other because we were both in the studio there, and Bob was coming in, and we had heard him at a competition. So we were really just really excited to work with each other. You know, we were like, these are the best of the best on their instruments, and let's make some music. And like we were talking about with competitions, we had some success, a little bit of validation, I guess. And that gave us a little bit more confidence to do what we do. So, and it just progressed from there. As far as the artistic mission of the group and repertoire that we choose, we actually like made a pact with each other to make sure that everyone's happy. You know, everyone is getting their fulfillment out of the group. So we all have very different likes and dislikes when it comes to repertoire, but we are passionate about giving our all to each one of those, and that's something I think that we all really appreciate about each other and brings us closer, because we were trying to think like, okay, is there something we should be, is there a niche that we should stay in? And you know, there wasn't something really that combined us all except for our collective passion for music and the saxophone, and how that manifests is in a lot of different ways, and I think that's what makes us special.
Okay, great. So can you give an example maybe? I think it would be helpful in terms of how that plays out in terms of programming. I mean, when you're thinking about diverse musical styles, and you all have your own individual interests, of course, how does that play out when you're then striving for a collective, aesthetic impact that fulfills simultaneously all of your personal goals, but also comes together as a concrete whole? It's going to be really satisfying for an audience.
Well, it's actually it's pretty simple when your instrument is conducive to many different styles of music. So that's lucky that we play the saxophone. But basically, you know, I mean, I'm a composer, and I've written a lot for the group, and we usually when we're deciding on a particular program for any concert, we have these brainstorming sessions of, let's look at all the repertoire we have. We have transcriptions of classical works. We have new works by composers written in the past few years. We have works that are jazz influenced. We have works that are film music influenced, accessible works, and some not so accessible works. And, we kind of brainstorm through this whole pool of repertoire that we have for this particular concert. What's the audience, and what do we want to bring to this audience? So we might think that they would be interested in a certain type of music. Well, then we might see what are some tangentially related styles of music that we could add to a program that maybe this audience is not familiar with, but they would probably get into if they heard it. Right? And so, and it's fun to have those discussions when we all have our each different particular style that we kind of are individually like really gung-ho about. And especially with that pact having been made, we always come to a conclusion on the repertoire that we choose that includes some elements of each person's individual.
So you're sharing, in other words, thinking about the sort of artistic directorship role, because you're also curators. You're curators of music in addition to performers. And so you kind of have shared governance, if you will. Is that how that works?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's probably hard to make 25% of the decisions, but you try to come to consensus together. Is that kind of representative of your process?
Yeah, and for each performance, I mean, there's going to be a different audience. Okay. So it's not necessarily 25% for everything, but like for this performance tonight, we're going to be doing quite a bit of new music, because we're at the conservatory and people are looking for the newest thing that's out there and something they haven't heard before. But we've done concerts of primarily French music or Baroque things, or like Corey was saying, film influenced things. So even though it might not be every single gig, everyone gets
one piece.
Yeah, one piece. Yeah, it's not like that, but it's just kind of an overall aesthetic thing. that can change based on the performance.
That's great. So let's we can't leave the discussion without talking a little bit about Emprise. And I'm curious, your experience, in the competition, but also in terms of what we just talked about, which is your aesthetic. So how much control do you feel like you had going into that? I think picking repertoire is always probably one of the hardest things about a competition when you have some flexibility. Can you talk a little bit about that and just also the experience at Emprise and what's happened since your success as a laureate there?
Yeah, I think when we were programming for the competition, we tried to think about like what about our repertoire really was really connected to us. Like, there's so much music out there for saxophone quartet, but there's pieces we find ourselves going back to because they really they not only like speak to us like on a group level, but we feel like we can really say something substantive. And so I think we thought a lot about like, what could we say and how is that different from other groups? And in terms of the aesthetic, I think it's really important to all of us that, it's not so much that the Kenari Quartet sounds like this, but it's that when we get into a piece and we really try to interpret it, we think, how can we really like be a service to the music, and how can we mold ourselves around that, instead of just kind of looking through different pieces from the same perspective each time.
Right. Great. Okay, so that was about a year ago, not even quite a year at this point. So what has changed for you since the Emprise?
One big one.
Yeah, I think I've had the biggest benefit out of the group from it. We got a baritone saxophone.
Right.
So before I was kind of playing whatever was in front of me, asking friends for favors. But yeah, we've got a shiny, brand new instrument. And I think also, obviously a lot of exposure. We now have management, which has been really great. Someone like fighting on our behalf.
Right.
And again, I think it's a confidence boost. Just something that feels really great to have under your belt and gives you even more license to move forward artistically. And just about Emprise, I have to say is I just appreciate that competition so much for its commitment to diversity, and the judges panel was really amazing, and I think it's a true testament to how much different the music world looks than a lot of people might think, and the excellence that comes out of that. How many great judges there were, performers, and the music that was played. I think it's a real success in that way. So that's something that I also really took away from Emprise.
That's great. Well, we're so glad you had a good experience. I know just as a sort of an observer, it was pretty thrilling as well. And we're so glad to have you back on campus. And just as a final thought here, just going off what you said a moment ago, Bob, it sounds to me like, rather than thinking about how, and this has been a theme throughout this conversation, rather than thinking about how you compare as a group, you're really focused on identifying what is true to you, what really makes you distinctive. And I think that pays dividends potentially in the competition world, but just as a group of artists, I think it's really important and a great message for our students. So it's great to have you back on campus. So glad you're going to be here for a performance, and we can't wait to see what you all will do next. So thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.